At the very moment of the Big Bang, the universe exploded into existence, giving birth to the first stars and galaxies.
One of the first stars to be forged in this chaos produced a photon, a tiny particle of light that was destined for a remarkable journey. From our perspective on Earth, billions of years have passed since the photon was created. Yet for the photon, time as we know it cannot exist. If it could somehow experience time as we do, its journey from the beginning of the universe to Earth would be instantaneous. Time, as we experience it, cannot exist for anything travelling at the speed of light. A common saying among physicists is that
time is that which happens to prevent everything from happening all at once.
For the photon, or for anything travelling at the speed of light, there is no such barrier. The journey would have been instantaneous, as if it had been transported across billions of years and light years in the blink of an eye. For anything travelling at the speed of light, time cannot exist. But here on Earth, we do experience the reality of time.
The reality of time for many is unquestionably and irrefutably simple. It is something we experience directly as life moves ever constantly forward. Its existence is tangible and measured with watches and calendars.
However, this simple and intuitive view of time breaks down when we consider it more deeply.
For example, the idea of time travel assumes that time is something that can be modified, warped, and folded back on itself, which challenges our traditional view of time as having a steady and unidirectional flow.
While we have yet to discover a way to physically travel backwards in time, modern theories of physics have shown that time can be manipulated in ways that were once thought impossible. For example, it can be slowed or sped up relative to others in different places, meaning their watches will measure time differently. So, what exactly then is the reality of time?
Is it as Newton imagined, something independent from the world, or outside it? Is it malleable as Einstein thought, or merely an emergent byproduct of other forces? Or is it really just consciousness, as Kant and some modern quantum theorists have ventured? Is time even real?
If you're like me, then most likely when you think about time, the first thing that pops into your head is the image of a clock. And the second hands are just there sort of ticking away. It's a very useful conception of time to keep track of busy schedules, but it's not a great representation of time in itself. So then, now we ask, well then what is time? And immediately we're thrown into the rabbit hole of a whole bunch of different theories of time, but I think the best place to start is actually with the question of whether time is something that's external to a subjective experience, or if it's internal to the subject. The idea that time holds no external reality is something that has been around for a very long time, perhaps most famously in the work of Immanuel Kant.
The idea of time as something that flows, which we measure with seconds and divide into past, present, and future, is deeply ingrained in our perception of reality. This intuitive understanding of time has its roots in experience, and which is explained rationally in the theories of classical physics. These theories describe the universe as if it were a clock, where time moves forward at a steady pace, and objects follow predictable trajectories.
In this theory, we can imagine that the exact time it is here on Earth, every other clock in the universe will match, and each second would be experienced exactly as it is here on Earth, by everyone else in the universe at the same time.
We would all share the same moment, no matter where we are in the galaxy.
The emergence of Einstein's theory of relativity in the early 20th century, however, challenged traditional notions of absolute time. The theory of relativity proposed that time and space were interwoven and that they could not be understood independently of one another. It suggested that time was not universal and objective, but rather it could appear differently to observers in different locations depending on their relative motion. This theory, while counterintuitive, marked a significant shift in our understanding of the nature of time and paved the way for new ideas and research in the field of physics. One way of understanding this is the hypothetical story of the photon introduced at the beginning of this movie. Although a photon itself could not actually experience time, for anything moving near the speed of light, however, time would slow down drastically relative to an observer at rest. At the speed of light, time effectively ceases to exist.
More importantly, merely approaching the speed of light would profoundly transform how time is experienced.
In other words, there is no universal clock where time runs the same for all people, and there would be as many clocks and different experiences of time in the universe as there are stars.
The development of quantum theory in the 1920s also challenged traditional views of time. Quantum mechanics describes the behavior of particles at the atomic and subatomic levels, where the laws of classical physics break down. According to quantum mechanics, particles do not have a definite position or momentum until they are observed, and their behavior is subject to probabilistic laws. This means that the notion of cause and effect, which is fundamental to our intuitive understanding of time, is not always applicable in the quantum world. In other words, in the universe of subatomic particles, the chicken can come before the egg, or even at the same time, even when millions of light years apart.
Quantum entanglement also implies the possibility of faster-than-light communication, which is incompatible with classical theories of physics and relativity. Furthermore, the concept of retrocausality has also emerged in some interpretations of quantum mechanics, challenging the traditional idea of cause and effect. This theory suggests that the effect can occur before the cause, and the present can be influenced by events that have not yet occurred. While controversial, this theory highlights the complexity and mystery surrounding our understanding of time and the universe.
Today, many physicists are exploring the frontiers of our understanding of time, drawing on both relativity and quantum theory. One of the more interesting theories is the idea of a block universe, where time is seen as a dimension similar to space. According to this theory, the past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, and the illusion of time moving forward arises from our subjective experience of it.
Other theories propose that time is not a fundamental aspect of the universe, but rather it emerges from more basic components. For example, the theory of loop quantum gravity suggests that space-time is made up of tiny loops, and time arises from the interaction between these loops.
And then there is our intuitive sense of time, in which we imagine time as something that flows steadily forward, from the past through the present and into the future, and that it is experienced uniformly by all observers. We measure this time with clocks and use it to mark the passage of events and the rhythms of daily life. However, this understanding of time has been called into question by modern physics, which has revealed that time is far more complex and elusive than we previously imagined.
According to many physicists, this intuitive understanding of time is not accurate. To understand why, we first turn to Einstein's theory of relativity, which challenges the notion of a universal objective time that is experienced the same way by all.
The passage of time depends on unique factors, such as an object's speed or proximity to a source of gravity. Gravity, within this theoretical framework, will alter one's experience of time. The more gravity one experiences, the slower time will pass for you, as opposed to someone in a zero-gravity environment. For instance, when an object speeds up, time slows down ever so slightly, for it compared to something stationary on Earth. Similarly, these effects can even be felt on Earth as well. For example, someone on Mount Everest or in an airplane experiences time slightly faster than someone at sea level due to the reduced gravity at higher elevations. When they return from their trip, if they wore a very precise watch, it would have a different time than someone at ground level when measured in nanoseconds. even if these effects were magnified, a person travelling, say, near the speed of light, would not feel time pass differently. And to someone observing them from Earth, if such a thing were possible, they would appear to move in very slow motion.
These effects are subtle and difficult to perceive by us on Earth, but they can be measured and verified with highly precise atomic clocks. Einstein's theory of relativity explains these differences in time, but it doesn't fully account for everything, including how time operates on the quantum level.
This is where the concept of quantum time comes into play. While the theory of relativity deals with how gravity and speed on large scales alters the experience of time, quantum time explores how time operates at the smallest scales of the universe, where time may not be linear and continuous as we typically think of it. According to quantum mechanics, particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously, a phenomenon known as superposition. This idea challenges our classical understanding of reality, where an object can only be in one state at a time. But what does this have to do with time?
Well, the concept of superposition also applies to this. In classical physics, time is thought of as a continuous linear progression. However, at the quantum level, time can be thought of as existing in multiple states at once. It's like a particle existing in different locations simultaneously. Time could also exist in overlapping moments. This idea is known as non-locality, which means that time may not be confined to a specific point or moment. Instead, it could be spread out across multiple moments, just as particles can be spread out across multiple locations. This idea challenges our intuitive understanding of time, where it is experienced as a continuous flow, moving from the past, through the present, and into the future.
In essence, quantum time challenges our classical understanding of time as a linear and continuous progression. It suggests that time may exist in multiple states at once.
The development of quantum theory in the early 20th century revolutionized our understanding of the physical world, challenging classical notions of determinism and causality. Unlike the predictability of classical physics, quantum mechanics introduces probabilistic behavior and the concept of wave-particle duality. Probabilistic behavior is a fundamental concept in quantum mechanics, which states that the behavior of particles on a subatomic level is governed by probabilities. In other words, quantum mechanics does not allow us to precisely predict the exact position or momentum of a particle at a given time, but only the probability of finding it in a certain state.
In the world of theoretical physics, the problem of time emerges from this conflict between quantum mechanics and general relativity. Quantum mechanics treats time as universal and absolute, while general relativity reveals it as malleable, something that bends and warps alongside space. This contradiction leads us to ask, what is time, really? Is it something concrete or merely an illusion?
In classical mechanics, time has always been a background parameter, external to the system. The classical treatment of time is closely tied to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, and by extension, to the conceptual foundations of quantum theory. In this view, time is treated as an external, fixed parameter, and all measurements of observables are made at specific instants. We measure particles and observe their behavior at specific moments in time, but time itself remains untouched. It seems solid, dependable. Yet in Einstein's universe, time is entangled with space, woven into the very fabric of reality. Gravity shapes and bends space-time.
Solutions to this paradox are not easy to come by. In the 1960s, Bryce DeWitt introduced the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, hinting that time, as we know it, might emerge from the complex dance of quantum gravity. Other ideas emerged from the minds of Don Page and William Wouters, who proposed that time might be a result of quantum entanglement. Their work suggested that time could be an internal phenomenon, experienced by observers within the universe, but absent from the viewpoint of an external observer.
At its core, the question of time touches on our understanding of reality itself. Is time a fundamental aspect of the universe, or is it something we construct to make sense of the world?
Experimental tests like those carried out in Italy in 2013 support the idea that time is an emergent phenomenon, one that exists for us inside the universe, but disappears when viewed from the outside.
New interpretations of quantum mechanics, like the Montevideo interpretation, add further complexity. They argue that even our clocks, our most reliable measure of time, are subject to quantum uncertainty. Time may not be as continuous as we once thought, but may consist of discrete, unmeasurable intervals. The very act of measuring time alters it, forcing us to rethink our understanding of what time truly is.
In the thermal time hypothesis proposed by Carlo Rovelli and Alain Connes, time is rooted in thermodynamics. It arises from the flow of heat and the irreversible processes we see every day. Time, in this view, is a product of change, of entropy. It is not fundamental, but emerges from the complex interactions of the universe.
The arrow of time in this theory is the result of entropy, the measure of disorder in a system. A cup shattering or ice melting are examples of entropy rising, and this progression is what gives us the sense that time flows forward. Without this thermodynamic process, the distinction between past and future would disappear.
What we perceive as the flow of time is simply our interaction with increasing disorder. At its core, reality is timeless, with multiple nows existing simultaneously, all connected by thermodynamic changes.
The theory of time as entropy is not without its critics. A significant challenge is that, while the second law of thermodynamics describes how entropy increases over time, it does not explain why the universe began in a highly ordered, structured state of low entropy. This unresolved question indicates that any comprehensive explanation of the arrow of time must also address the cosmological origins of the universe's initial conditions, or how it all began.
Some physicists and cosmologists propose that the universe's initial low-entropy state may be the result of processes we do not yet understand, likely tied to quantum gravity or the physics of the Big Bang itself.
Physicist Francesca Vidotto has addressed the issue of the universe's initial low entropy within the framework of loop quantum gravity in collaboration with Carlo Rovelli. They propose in a 2018 paper that remnants of black holes from a pre-Big Bang phase could account for the universe's low initial entropy. These remnants, transitioning into white holes, might have survived through a bounce preceding the Big Bang, thereby providing a natural explanation for the observed low entropy at the universe's beginning.
Stephen Hawking and James Hartley, through their no-boundary proposal, suggested that the universe began as a quantum state where time and space were indistinguishable, gradually evolving into the macroscopic universe we observe. In this framework, the low-entropy beginning arises naturally from quantum principles without requiring a classical starting point. Near the Big Bang, time behaves like a spatial dimension. Instead of a singular start point, the universe gradually transitions from a timeless quantum state to the space-time we now experience. In this view, asking what happened before time is like asking what is north of the North Pole. It's a question that doesn't apply.
Another perspective comes from Sean Carroll, who has explored the idea that the low-entropy state could be a feature of statistical mechanics within a multiverse framework. In this view, our universe's low-entropy beginning might not require a unique physical mechanism, but could be a statistical necessity for observers to exist, with countless other universes lacking such conditions.
Another approach to understanding time comes from topology, the study of shapes and structures. In space-time, topology determines its overall structure, whether flat, spherical, or saddle-shaped. A flat space-time behaves in a linear fashion, with time flowing straightforwardly from past to future. In a cyclical topology, time can loop back on itself. Certain solutions to Einstein's equations allow for closed, time-like curves, theoretical pathways through space-time that return to their starting point. These possibilities arise in scenarios like rotating universes or wormholes. In higher dimensional or more complex topologies, time might not even be confined to a single dimension, but could behave like a multidimensional entity, interacting in ways beyond human comprehension. These ideas are at the heart of string theory and extra-dimensional models. Whether time flows linearly, loops, or exists in multiple dimensions depends entirely on the shape and connectivity of spacetime.
Physicists often describe spacetime topology using concepts like de Sitter space and anti-de Sitter space. De Sitter space represents a universe with outward curvature that continuously expands over time. It's often used to model scenarios where space stretches uniformly in all directions. Anti-de Sitter space, on the other hand, curves inward like the surface of a saddle. It has unique geometric properties, including boundaries that play an important role in understanding how space and time function under different conditions. These geometries influence how time behaves, whether it stretches, contracts, or loops back on itself. Einstein's field equations, which describe how matter and energy warp spacetime, are nonlinear. This means that small changes in one region can have cascading effects elsewhere. Gravitational time dilation, where time slows near massive objects like black holes, is one such result of these nonlinear dynamics. Gravitational waves, ripples caused by massive cosmic events, also reveal how spacetime evolves, carrying information about their sources and the structure of the universe itself.
The idea of extra dimensions adds another layer of complexity to the nature of time. In the 1920s, Theodore Kaluza proposed extending Einstein's field equations to include a fifth dimension. This fifth dimension unified gravity and electromagnetism, producing Maxwell's equations in the same framework. Oscar Klein refined this theory by suggesting that the fifth dimension was compactified, curled up so tightly it was imperceptible, like a tiny circle at every point in spacetime. Kaluza-Klein theory showed that forces might emerge from the geometry of higher dimensional space, hinting that time itself could also be shaped by these hidden dimensions.
By the 1970s, string theory evolved from Kaluza-Klein ideas, proposing that particles are not points, but tiny vibrating strings. These strings require 10 dimensions to exist, 9 spatial and 1 temporal. The extra dimensions are compactified into intricate shapes called Calabi-Yau manifolds. These hidden structures determine the behavior of particles and forces in the observable universe. Time, in string theory, remains a single dimension, but is intertwined with the geometry of these compactified spaces. The vibrations of strings within these spaces influence how forces evolve and how particles interact.
In the 1990s, Edward Witten unified versions of string theory into M theory, which expanded the framework to 11 dimensions. M theory introduced the concept of branes, multi-dimensional surfaces existing within a higher dimensional bulk. Our universe, a 4-dimensional brane of 3 spatial dimensions and 1 of time, floats within this bulk. While particles and forces like electromagnetism are confined to the brane, gravity can leak into the bulk. This leakage might explain why gravity is weaker than the other forces. The warping of spacetime within the bulk could also affect time itself, slowing it drastically near massive objects or creating regions where time behaves unexpectedly.
Lisa Randall and Raman Sundram advanced these concepts with their models of warped extra dimensions. These models propose that the warping of extra dimensions not only influences gravity, but also distorts time, potentially creating regions where time stretches, slows, or even loops.
Juan Maldacena's AD-S-CFT correspondence takes this further, suggesting that time emerges as an approximate property derived from the relationships between quantum fields. This implies that time itself may be a byproduct of deeper underlying quantum structures.
The physicist Julian Barber, in his book The End of Time, explores the idea that time may not actually exist, known as the block theory of time. This theory suggests that the universe consists of only static moments that have always existed, with no past or future. Our consciousness arises from a complex arrangement in this static world that deceives us into believing in the reality of motion and memory. However, according to this theory, there is only the present moment, which eternally exists in a timeless universe filled with a great many other eternally existing moments, all of which are highly structured and comparable to still images of the entire universe at discrete points.
In this theory, time is not fundamental and does not exist independently of events, but instead emerges from a sequence of changes in the universe. Barber argues that the universe is a static configuration of all possible configurations, and all changes are illusory. According to this theory, our perception of time and the passage of time are just a mental construct, and the present moment is all that exists.
This concept of a static universe brings up the Boltzmann brain hypothesis, which suggests that our consciousness is a result of a random fluctuation in a static universe. The Boltzmann brain hypothesis suggests that if you had a brain in a vat and fed it stimuli, memories, and allowed it to achieve a complexity of thought where it could anticipate a future, it would believe itself to be in a world. It would believe it has a past, is experiencing a present, and has a future, when in reality, the only thing it ever experiences is this very present moment. The past and future are mere illusions. In addition, the hypothesis suggests you may not even need a brain, merely the information in such a form to replicate human consciousness.
However, physicist Julian Barber critiques and ultimately dismisses the Boltzmann brain hypothesis in his more recent work, The Janus Point, where his views have since evolved, and where he argues that the arrow of time is fundamentally tied to the increase of complexity in the universe rather than just entropy. In Barber's earlier theory, in the end of time, there is no future or past, at least in the sense we might intuitively believe, only a perpetual present that exists alongside every other possible moment in a universe where time itself has no reality. Our consciousness is essentially a broken record, replaying this moment. However, even that analogy does not exactly capture the idea, because in Barber's universe there simply is no time for a record to even play, merely the illusion that it is playing in this moment. All of our memories, experiences, and even the illusion of motion and expectations of a future are just an artifact of this present moment. On the bright side, it also means we live eternally in a present which never really passes, but which we only believe does.
While this theory may seem shocking, it provides a possible answer to the question of how the universe came into existence, as there is no need to explain how something came from nothing or how time began. However, this theory is not without its critics, and some argue that time is a real and fundamental aspect of the universe. One such critic is Lee Smolin, a physicist who argues that time is a real thing and not just an illusion. He believes that the universe is constantly changing and evolving, and time is an essential part of that process. Smolin's views challenge Barber's timeless physics, suggesting that time is fundamental and plays a crucial role in the workings of the universe.
Lee Smolin's most famous book, Time Reborn, proposes a radical reinterpretation of the nature of time in the universe. Smolin argues that time is not an illusion, as some theories such as Julian Barber's block universe theory suggest, but a fundamental aspect of reality.
Smolin's theory begins with the recognition that the laws of physics themselves evolve over time. This means that the laws governing the universe in the present moment are not the same as the laws that governed the universe in the past, and they will not be the same as the laws that govern the universe in the future. Smolin suggests that this implies that time is real and that it plays a crucial role in the evolution of the universe. In contrast to Barber's static universe, Smolin's theory proposes that the universe is constantly evolving and changing. This means that the future is not predetermined, and the present moment is not an illusion, but rather a genuine and unique moment in time. Smolin's theory has important implications for our understanding of the nature of reality. If time is real, it means that the universe is not a static block universe, but rather a dynamic and evolving system. This suggests that the future is not fixed and that there is always the possibility for change and growth. Smolin's theory also challenges some of the fundamental assumptions of modern physics.
For example, many theories in physics assume that the laws of physics are timeless and unchanging, but Smolin argues this is not the case. Instead, he suggests that the laws of physics themselves are subject to evolution and change. over time.
In contrast to Barber's block universe theory, which suggests that time is an illusion and that the universe is static, Smolin's theory proposes that time is a real and fundamental aspect of reality.
To understand the perspectives of modern theorists on the nature of time, we must first trace the philosophical roots of time back to antiquity. The pre-Socratic philosophers, active between the 7th and 5th centuries BCE, are often regarded as the earliest Western thinkers to delve into the nature of the universe, reality, and the concept of time. Their diverse views laid the groundwork for many ideas we continue to debate today. However, framing the philosophy of time as beginning exclusively with the pre-Socratics overlooks the contributions of other ancient cultures. In reality, these early philosophers did not operate in isolation. They inherited intellectual traditions from older civilizations across the Mediterranean, many of which have been lost to time but still shape their thinking.
For instance, many thinkers in the first millennium BCE travelled to distant lands such as ancient Egypt and Babylon to study, bringing back ideas that would shape the development of philosophy in ancient Greece. Diogenes Laertius, writing in the 3rd century CE, noted that some historians of his time believed philosophy originated with non-Greeks, or the barbarians as they called them. They cited a lost work called On Magic, which some attributed to Aristotle, as evidence for this belief. These authors claimed that philosophy began with the Persian Magi, the Chaldean priests of Babylon, the Druids of the Celts, and even a figure named Moccus of Sidon, who supposedly lived around 1200 BCE. Some ancient writers, such as Posidonius and Strabo, considered Moccus to be the founder of atomic theory.
So, what do we know about those who came before the ancient Greeks? One of the earliest known historians, Sanchuniathon, is believed to have lived in Phoenicia around the time of the Trojan War, which scholars now place around 1200 BCE, at least 700 years before Herodotus. Although Sanchuniathon's works have been lost to time, fragments of his writings were preserved by later authors like Eusebius. According to Eusebius, Sanchuniathon sought to uncover the earliest history of all nations, tracing it back to a figure he called Tautus, who he said was known as Thoth in Egyptian mythology and Hermes in Greek. Sanchuniathon criticized more recent writers for distorting ancient knowledge and turning it into myths and allegories, accusing them of obscuring the truth. He claimed to have accessed secret writings hidden by the Ammonians in their shrines, stripping away the myths and allegories to restore the original historical accounts. He argued that over time, others transformed these stories into myths, giving rise to mysticism and fabricating unbelievable tales that were far removed from reality. He then writes of a cosmology that is eerily similar to the Big Bang.
The first principle of the universe was air, dark, filled with cloud and wind, or rather, a turbulent cloudy blast and a chaotic darkness akin to Erebus, the darkness that permeates the divide between our world and the underworld. This primordial state was boundless and existed for countless ages. But when the wind became enamored with its own origins and intertwined with them, a union was formed by the forces of attraction, marking the beginning of all creation, though the wind itself remained unaware of its own genesis. From this union, Mot was born, interpreted by some as mud, and by others as a decayed, watery substance.
The idea of water, or a watery substance, as the foundation of all things, is often considered by modern scholarship to mark the beginning of philosophy in ancient Greece, but we see such an idea in Phoenicia long before Thales.
As for the ancient Egyptians, the idea of Thoth or Hermes as one of the original proto-philosophers of antiquity re-emerged thousands of years later during the Renaissance, when scholars rediscovered the Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of writings once believed to date back to ancient Egypt. These texts were considered so significant that the Renaissance scholar tasked with translating all of Plato's works, Marsilio Ficino, abandoned his project of translating Plato to focus on the Corpus Hermeticum, believing those writings held more ancient and authoritative wisdom. By the 17th century, however, religious authorities and scholars began to question their authenticity, arguing that the corpus hermeticum was a product of the 2nd century CE, created during the Roman Empire rather than in the distant past of Egypt. As a result, the corpus hermeticum fell out of favour with academics who viewed it as a Neo-Platonic invention. Yet, more recent research in the 20th century has shown that while the texts were indeed compiled during the 2nd century, their source material is in fact rooted in much older Egyptian literature, known as the Seh-Bait. This suggests that the corpus hermeticum may indeed preserve the ancient wisdom of the pharaohs.
The corpus hermeticum offers a blend of philosophical ideas that we often associate with distant lands such as India and Tibet. Its teachings emphasize meditative focus, the rejection of unattainable desires to avoid suffering, and the cultivation of moral character. The texts also convey a belief in being reborn after death, where the mind transitions into a higher form of existence. The influence of the corpus hermeticum was vast, shaping the ideas of key Renaissance figures. Giordano Bruno, a former priest turned free thinker and philosopher who was heavily inspired by the corpus hermeticum, used the ideas to challenge the Church's authority, ultimately being burned at the stake by the Inquisition for his views. However, no one can say with any certainty who wrote the corpus hermeticum, and modern scholarship generally assumes Thoth to be a mythological character. Sanchuniathon, however, does go on to say the following regarding Thoth.
The nature then of the dragon and of serpents, Thoth himself regarded as divine, and so again after him did the Phoenicians and Egyptians. For this animal was declared by him to be of all reptiles most full of breath and fiery, in consequence of which it also exerts an unsurpassable swiftness by means of its breath, without feet and hands, or any other of the external members by which the other animals make their movements. It also exhibits forms of various shapes, and in its progress makes spiral leaps as swift as it chooses. It is also most long-lived, and its nature is to put off its old skin, and so not only to grow young again, but also to assume a larger growth. And after it has fulfilled its appointed measure of age, it is self-consumed, in like manner as Tauthus himself has set down in his sacred books. And having built temples, they consecrated in the shrines the primary elements represented by serpents, and in their honour celebrated festivals, regarding them as the greatest gods and rulers of the universe. So much concerning serpents.
That is as much as Sanchuniathon has to say on the subject of Thoth. However, in ancient Egypt, we do find in one of the earliest pieces of literature another mention of a serpent.
In the story of a shipwrecked sailor, composed in the Middle Kingdom around 2000 BCE, a sailor on a ship is thrown overboard by a giant wave and washes up on the shores of an island with plenty of food and shelter. As he is making a burnt offering to the gods, there is thunder and the earth shakes, and a giant serpent appears and asks him 3 times who brought him to the island, at which time the sailor tells him he was on a mission for the pharaoh. The serpent tells the sailor not to fear, but that he will be rescued in 4 months by those he knows. It then tells him a story about a tragedy that befell the serpent and how he lost 74 of his relatives and his daughter when a star fell from the sky and they went up in flames with the island. The serpent continues by telling the sailor he is the Lord of Pont, and that when the sailor leaves, the sailor will not be able to see the island again, as the island will become water. The sailor then returns home, bringing with him gifts and treasures that impress his king upon his return.
Serpent cults could be found throughout the ancient world, as far away as India and Sri Lanka, and where the Aborigines of Australia, who have an oral history they believe extends back 50,000 years, speak of the ancient spiral art found throughout the world as
the era of the serpent which was man, the serpent which flies in the sky.
It is believed by many that the spiral art might have symbolized how ancient cultures viewed time, using it to represent cycles, eternity, or even that it served more practical purposes like marking time through calendars, seasons, and solstices. This motif is notably prevalent in the megalithic art of Ireland, especially within the Brú na Bóinne complex that was built around 3200 BCE, a significant prehistoric site that includes the passage graves of Newgrange, Noath, and Douth. each with their own archaeoastronomical significance linked to solar alignments. The spiral not only adorns these structures, but also appears in disparate locations and times, such as the Serpent Mound in North America and an engraved mammoth ivory piece from Siberia, the latter dated to 16,000 BCE.
The ancient Egyptians had a concept of a divine force called Atum, which they believed was the creator of everything and embodied the universe's fundamental nature.
On the fringes of historical and linguistic research, some speculate that the Greek word atomos, which means indivisible, could have been influenced by ancient Greeks who studied in Egypt, where they might have encountered the concept of Atum. This theory suggests that Egyptian metaphysical ideas could have subtly influenced early Greek philosophy.
Interestingly, the rotational geometry found in spiral art across ancient cultures bears a resemblance to modern, controversial claims of anti-gravity. In the 1990s, researcher Eugene Podkletnov claimed to observe a 2% reduction in gravity by spinning a superconductive disk. Similarly, Dr. Ning Li reported experiencing a comparable effect using superconductive ions spun in a vortex. Her research eventually was acquired by the United States Department of Defense, and much of it was classified, leaving the true extent of her findings unclear. Although these claims remain highly controversial and lack validation through the scientific peer review process, they raise an intriguing question. Could ancient spiral art represent an understanding of science and nature that has been lost over time? There are even more controversial claims, such as the idea that Stonehenge has connections to ancient Egypt. One modern mathematician has argued that the original layout of Stonehenge in 2500 BCE aligned with certain ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs that translate to eternally living Atum. Additionally, it is suggested that the layout of Stonehenge contains the atomic ratio for hydrogen. While intriguing, mainstream scholars and scientists generally regard these claims as speculative or coincidental, given the lack of concrete evidence to support such early knowledge of atomic theory.
Other researchers point to earlier prehistoric sites, such as a stone circle often described in the popular press as a mini Stonehenge. Discovered at the bottom of Lake Michigan, it is believed to have been built around 8000 BCE, or perhaps even earlier. However, the purposes of these sites remain a mystery. Some speculate they might have been connected to the timekeeping practices of ancient peoples who incorporated constellations into their designs, while others more reasonably conclude that these sites may have simply served as pragmatic tools for hunting animals.
While very few today take claims of ancient monuments containing coded scientific knowledge seriously, it is still worth considering the arguments of British philosopher Colin Wilson, who strongly challenged modern dogma and orthodoxy, which portray the ancient Egyptians as a primitive society bound by ritual and myth. He suggests that, much like how modern militaries and intelligence agencies often keep advanced knowledge and technology hidden from the public, certain Egyptian elites might have similarly guarded their scientific and technological knowledge. This secrecy could explain the absence of detailed historical records on the techniques, tools, and scientific understanding that made such monumental achievements possible, leaving us with only the results of their mastery without documentation of the processes behind them. Wilson suggests that biblical descriptions of the Ark of the Covenant may hint at ancient technology now lost to time. He references tales such as lightning striking from the Ark, theorizing it might have functioned as an electrical capacitor, and the plague of tumours that afflicted the Philistines, which he speculates could resemble symptoms of radiation sickness. While scholars interpret these accounts as mythological rather than historical, Wilson argues that these stories, while still literary, could represent fragmented oral histories of real events that later evolved into myth. For example, some authors highlight Isaac Newton's belief that Marcus of Sidon might have been Moses, as well as Sigmund Freud's theory that the Exodus, often dismissed as a fabrication due to the absence of corroborating historical records, could reflect a historical event that occurred during the reign of the pharaoh Akhenaten.
Akhenaten's reign was systematically erased through a process called the damnation of memory, in which subsequent pharaohs removed his name and legacy from monuments, inscriptions, and king lists. This erasure was so thorough that Akhenaten remained unknown to history until the late 19th century, when archaeological discoveries at Amarna brought his reign to light. However, the idea of associating biblical stories with Akhenaten's reign is largely rejected by modern scholarship, which views it as an unfounded attempt to blend mythology with historical events unsupported by evidence.
Colin Wilson argues that anomalies such as Libyan desert glass, the vitrified forts of Scotland, and microscopic, spiraled metallic objects discovered in Siberia that resemble nanotechnology and are dated to at least 20,000 BCE could suggest that people in ancient times were not as primitive as we are taught to believe. However, few today take seriously these claims, or that the biblical descriptions of the Ark of the Covenant, if they stem from a factual oral tradition, could represent accounts of advanced technology in the distant past. Modern interpretations of the Ark of the Covenant suggest, on the other hand, that it might have been more ceremonial in nature and been inspired by the ancient Egyptian design of a solar bark, as depicted in the Papyrus of Ani, which shows the ancient Egyptians journeying to Aru, or the Field of Reeds where Osiris, their god of the underworld, resides.
The Egyptian Book of the Dead served as a guide for the deceased to navigate the underworld, where they would face judgment before Osiris. In the judgment ceremony, the heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, representing truth. If the individual had lived righteously, they were allowed to enter the eternal paradise known as the Field of Reeds and continue to exist in a perfected form. If not, their heart would be devoured by Amit, and they would cease to exist, suffering a true death.
The ancient Egyptians viewed time as a journey that merged concepts of freedom, mortality, and eternity. One's choices in life determined their status in the afterlife. Death was not an end, but a transition. This concept of judgment and eternal life influenced later religious traditions, laying a foundation for ideas that emerged in Judaism, Christianity, and other faiths.
Colin Wilson's central argument, however, is that the construction of the Great Pyramid involved transporting around 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing several tons, with some as heavy as 80 tons, from quarries up to 500 miles away. This monumental task was accomplished without the use of wheels or modern machinery and required tens of thousands of workers who faced the challenge of working in an extreme environment lacking basic resources like water and wood. Despite these challenges, the blocks were placed with such precision that even a piece of paper can't fit between them, demonstrating an extraordinary level of skill and technological capability for that time.
Modern attempts to replicate the pyramid's construction have failed, such as a Japanese engineering project that, even with modern cranes, could not replicate the precision or successfully move the stones into place. They ultimately abandoned the effort and were unable to even construct a mini replica of the pyramid. The estimated timeline of 20 years for building the pyramid suggests placing one block every 2.5 minutes, a rate that seems nearly impossible given the size and weight of the stones. The lack of clear evidence about the tools used to cut and shape such hard materials as limestone and granite suggests that the Egyptians might have had access to technologies or techniques that remain unknown to us today, and more importantly, they might have had a deeper understanding of nature, which, while lost to time, might have trickled down to the ancient Greeks who studied there.
One account comes to us from Plato, who writes of the Athenian statesman Solon, who on a visit to ancient Egypt speaks with an Egyptian priest in the ancient city of Sais, who, when Solon asks him to tell him of the distant past, tells him the following.
Solon, you Greeks are nothing but children, and there is not an old person among you.
Solon, confused, asked him what he meant. The Egyptian priest replied,
You Greeks are young, because there was no knowledge passed down to you by ancient traditions, nor the science and technology of old. And I will tell you why. There have been and will be again many apocalyptic events from many different causes. The greatest have been through fire and water, and other lesser ones by plagues and the like. There is even a story you Greeks know that long ago, when Phaethon could not control his father Helios's chariot, and plunged into the earth and burned the entire globe before he himself was destroyed by lightning. Now, this is told as a myth, but in reality, it's about the movement of objects in the sky, which after long intervals come tumbling to the earth. At those times, those who live in the mountains or in dry and high places are less likely to die than those who live by water. From this destruction, we are saved by the Nile, who never fails us. On the other hand, when the earth is destroyed by floods, those that survive in your country are shepherds and goat keepers that live in the mountains, but those like you that live in cities are carried away into the sea. Whereas in Egypt, neither back then nor now did we experience such a deluge of floods, so we have been able to keep records of ancient times. And whatever happened, we were able to record, written down by our descendants, their writings preserved in our temples. And just when a society becomes civilized, the stream from heaven, like a plague, comes raining down upon the earth, killing all who are learned and educated. And so you have to begin all over again like children, and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, either among the Greeks or the Egyptians.
This account comes to us from Plato's dialogue Timaeus, which also contains many of his metaphysical and epistemological views. Much of modern scholarship views this dialogue as poetic invention because Plato tells the tale of Atlantis, a sunken continent, and which is often viewed today through the lens of Disney and superhero movies that portray Atlantis as a fantastical underwater city far removed from reality. However, Plato's story is not of an underwater city, but of a civilization on an island that existed in 10,000 BCE, which attempted to enslave the people of Europe and North Africa, but was thwarted by another power, and eventually Atlantis succumbed to what Plato describes as a day and night of misfortune, and perished. The reason for modern skepticism regarding his story of Atlantis is because no evidence of an ancient civilization in the middle of the Atlantic, as he described, has been found. They also point to later writers who believed Plato made the story up, and often state that Aristotle claimed the story of Atlantis was a poetic invention.
Much of the skepticism surrounding Plato's account of Atlantis can be reconsidered upon a closer examination of historical facts. The claim that Aristotle dismissed Atlantis as fiction originates from a 19th century misunderstanding, where a critic mistakenly attributed a reference to Homer as a reference to Plato in Aristotle's writings. In truth, Aristotle never outright stated that Atlantis was fictional. Interestingly, in his work On the Universe, Aristotle even suggested that other lands might exist across the ocean, which aligns with the notion that Plato's story could have had some basis in reality. Additionally, Crantor, a student of Plato, reportedly visited the Temple of Sais in Egypt and verified that columns existed, recording the story of Atlantis in the manner described by Plato, providing a potential external source of confirmation. Furthermore, Plato himself never indicated that his account was a work of fiction. He included specific details, such as mentioning an opposite continent, implying a level of accurate geographic knowledge that would have been unusual for his time.
It's also worth noting that the original Attic Greek versions of Plato's dialogues have not survived, and what we have today are copies in Byzantine Greek from the 9th century. This raises the possibility of translation or copyist errors that could have altered or obscured key details. Plato also mentioned that he substituted Greek terms for the original Egyptian ones, which may have led to misinterpretations regarding the story's true meaning and geographical references.
Given that Plato explicitly stated the Atlantis story originated from an Egyptian source, it's plausible that skepticism toward it stems not from it being a fictional allegory, but from misunderstandings introduced through flawed translations and interpretations. To understand the true origins of the story, one might need to look more closely at what the ancient Egyptians themselves documented, as Plato claimed to be recounting their narrative.
Many supporters of the Atlantis theory often point to a column in Luxor, Egypt, which they believe contains references to a sunken island. The ancient Egyptians envisioned a place at the edge of the known world called Aru, also phonetically rendered as Arlu or Arnu, known as the Field of Reeds. This paradise was often depicted as a series of flooded islands near the rising sun in the Far East, and was considered the domain of Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Interestingly, the ancient historian Manetho referred to the earliest rulers of Egypt as Oreteans, suggesting they may have believed their origins lay in Aru, linking it to their mythological roots.
The ancient Greeks had a similar concept in the form of the Elysian Fields, a paradise where heroes went after death. However, Greek poets like Homer placed the Elysian Fields at the western edge of the known world, unlike the Egyptians, who situated Aru in the east. If Solon's story was influenced by Aru, this raises the possibility that Plato, when constructing his Atlantis narrative, may have adapted this idea to fit a location more familiar to his Greek audience, shifting it from east to west.
While modern scholarship tends to interpret Aru as purely mythological, its parallels with Plato's tale of a flooded island suggest there may be more historical substance to the story. Supporting this idea, natives of the Bahariya oasis in Egypt present a strange genetic anomaly associated with a high percentage of the X2 haplogroup, which also appears in similarly high percentages among ancient populations of North America, and persists today among certain Native American tribes. This unexpected connection raises compelling questions about the possibility of ancient transoceanic contact prior to 7000 BCE, suggesting that the stories of Aru and Atlantis could be echoes of real voyages and cultural exchanges between now-lost civilizations across vast distances. Adding to this mystery, traces of nicotine and cocaine, substances native to the Americas, have been discovered in ancient Egyptian mummies, further challenging the conventional narrative of isolated Old and New World cultures. Additionally, while many skeptics claim that no other ancient writers mentioned Atlantis, this is also not true. Other historians such as Herodotus, Pliny the Elder, Diodorus Siculus, and many other authors also referenced Atlantis or Atlantes. The Roman author Claudius Aelian, writing in the 2nd century CE, even recorded legends of Atlantean kings who displayed their devotion to Poseidon by wearing crowns resembling the white band found on the head of a male ramfish, while the queens adorned themselves with headgear made from the gills of female ramfish.
Further reinforcing this connection, the Sumerians had their own myth of 7 sages known as the Apkallu, described in ways similar to Aelian's Atlantean kings. These sages were often depicted wearing fish or bird costumes, as seen in the bas-reliefs from the Temple of Ninurta at Nimrud. This legend is preserved in the writings of the Chaldean priest Berosus from the 3rd century BCE, who chronicled Babylonian myths. His accounts survive through works by later scholars like Alexander Polyhistor, a 1st century BCE Greek scholar, who provides us with the following account.
In the first year, Oannes made his appearance. From a part of the Persian Gulf which bordered upon Babylonia, the whole body of the animal was like that of a fish, and had under a fish head another head, and also feet below, similar to those of a man, subjoined to the fishtail. His language was human, and a representation of him is preserved even to this day. This being in the daytime used to converse with men, but took no food at that season, and he gave them an insight into letters and sciences, and every kind of art. He taught them to construct houses, to found temples, to compile laws, and explain to them the principles of geometrical knowledge. He made them distinguish the seeds of the earth, and showed them how to collect fruits. From that time, so universal were his instructions. Nothing has been added material by way of improvement. When the sun set, it was the custom of this being to plunge again into the sea, and abide all night in the deep, for he was amphibious.
This description, which evokes images of mythical mermen, could just as plausibly describe humans who wore clothing made from fish, whale, or shark skin, much like the way many Arctic indigenous cultures today use whale and seal skin to create leather garments. Such traditions persist among the Ainu of Japan and the Alutiiq people, the indigenous inhabitants of Kodiak Island in Alaska, who craft clothing from fish and bird skins along with seal hunting hats made from similar materials.
In the Arctic, the ancient land bridge of Beringia, now beneath the waves, offers an intriguing location that offers a parallel to Plato's story of a land that was lost to the sea. This land bridge, which once connected Asia and North America, began sinking beneath rising sea levels between 10,000 and 9,000 BCE, which is the date Plato provides for the destruction of Atlantis. Remarkably, this is also around the time when farming first emerged in eastern Anatolia, an area linked to ancient flood myths, where survivors arriving on an ark are frequently mentioned in religious and mythological texts. Over the past 12,000 years, as the Ice Age ended and the planet warmed, sea levels have risen approximately 400 feet, submerging what was once a vast landmass that spanned nearly 1,000 miles from north to south.
In the region surrounding Beringia, modern sonar imaging of the seabed off the coast of Kodiak Island has revealed interesting features, including what appears to be a giant, human-sized face in the remains of a possible caldera southeast of Chirikov Island. While this formation is likely a natural geological feature, it does present an avenue for further research. This is particularly interesting when considering that, based on current sea level depths, certain dimensions of Kodiak Island around 10,000 BCE may align with Plato's descriptions of Atlantis. For instance, the island's length at the time was likely around 230 miles, which closely matches one of Plato's reported measurements. Additionally, Chirikov Island, then a small mountain, would have been located about 5 to 6 miles offshore, further reinforcing this comparison.
Dr. Frank C. Hibben, a prominent archaeologist from the University of New Mexico, went on an expedition to Alaska in the 1940s. He writes, quote, "In many places, the Alaskan muck blanket is packed with animal bones and debris in trainload lots. Bones of mammoths, mastodon, several kinds of bison, horses, wolves, bears, and lions tell a story. Mammals there were in abundance, dumped in all attitudes of death. Most of them were pulled apart of some unexplained prehistoric catastrophic disturbance. Legs and torsos, and heads and fragments were found together in piles or scattered separately. We have gained from the muck pits of the Yukon Valley a picture of quick extinction. The evidences of violence there are so obvious as in the horror camps of Germany. Such piles of bodies of animals or men simply do not occur by any ordinary means."
A 2017 paper published in Scientific Reports revealed the discovery of microspherules in these Yukon muck deposits, supporting the theory of a massive catastrophe likely caused by the airburst of an exploding asteroid fragment. This event may have occurred as early as 9,000 BCE and played a role in the rapid mass extinction of late Pleistocene megafauna. The deposits reveal tangled remains, indicating sudden death from a massive flood or windburst, their bodies preserved in the ice for over 10,000 years.
It's easy to dismiss ancient tales as mere poetic invention, but many of these stories may contain threads of historical truth. A prime example is Heinrich Schliemann, who, despite being told Troy was a myth, relied on Homer's epic works to locate the lost city. His discovery demonstrated that myth and legend can sometimes serve as valuable guides to uncovering the past, hinting that other ancient narratives might also hold hidden truths.
You might be asking yourself, well, what does Plato's story of Atlantis have to do with the nature of time?
Whether or not Plato's tale of Atlantis is rooted in historical fact, it highlights an existential truth. Given enough time, all things recede into the past, leaving no trace of their existence. Consider the city of Sais, where Plato claims Solon learned of Atlantis's fate. Today, very little of it remains, and as time marches on, our own human endeavours will also fade into obscurity. Just as civilizations that could have thrived 12,000 years ago would now be lost to us, we too will eventually face a similar fate. All the things we value and spend our life acquiring, possessions, reputation, knowledge, can then be seen for what they really are: nothing. The contemplation of death, not just of our own, but the extinction of all that exists, might then perhaps encourage us to step back from the pursuit of what we have been led to believe is meaningful when it is not. It calls us to be mindful of the one aspect of consciousness we generally neglect in the race to possess various things: the present moment. The fleeting experience of the present, often overlooked and forgotten, is ironically the one thing for which nothing else would be possible. It is not only the ground of our being, it is the reality of time.
The possibility that other now forgotten people and ancient cultures, such as ancient Egypt, might have influenced the earliest known philosophers and, by extension, the development of philosophy, is worthy of contemplation. However, due to the scarcity of physical evidence, any such claims remain inherently speculative. What we do know with certainty is that the ancient Greeks were among the earliest to systematically explore philosophical questions, laying the groundwork for much of Western thought. Therefore, it is to them and the philosophical traditions they documented that we turn for insights into the origins of philosophical inquiry.
The ancient Greek concept of time was built upon a different foundation than how we typically think of it. For instance, individuals often perceive time to pass at different rates based on their activities. It seems to move more quickly during enjoyable moments and slower when feeling bored. People commonly believe that time passes slower in youth and accelerates as they age, likely due to the increased freedom to engage in activities of personal interest. During sleep, time appears to vanish, akin to the imaginary experience of a photon. However, it is crucial to recognize that this understanding pertains to our perception of the passage of time. In contrast, the ancient Greeks directed their inquiries toward the nature of time itself, with many philosophers in ancient Greece being the pioneers in exploring such questions.
Thales, an influential pre-Socratic philosopher who resided in the city of Miletus during the 6th century BCE, holds the distinction of being regarded as the first philosopher in the Western tradition and is often hailed as the father of science. Although no surviving writings of Thales exist, our knowledge of his ideas is mainly derived from accounts provided by ancient authors, most notably Aristotle. Thales was reputed to have predicted eclipses, recognized the spherical nature of the Earth, viewed stars as fiery matter akin to the Earth, considered moonlight as sunlight's reflection, and posited that water was the fundamental element from which all things derived.
Our conventional understanding of time often likens it to a flowing river, where one moment gives way to the next in an unstoppable forward motion. This analogy, however, has been questioned by philosophers throughout history. While it is uncertain whether Thales, an ancient philosopher, held such a perspective, modern thinkers like Wittgenstein argue against using spatial metaphors or analogies to comprehend time. Wittgenstein contends that applying concepts like length, which belong to the realm of space, to the unique nature of time, is erroneous and leads to paradoxes. Although we find it intuitive to perceive time as a river or a divisible line consisting of distinct moments in our daily lives, according to thinkers like Wittgenstein, this approach fails to grasp the true essence of time itself, which eludes our attempts to understand it objectively. It is something which can only be experienced subjectively, and for which language isn't really capable of describing without resorting to spatial concepts.
In Thales's philosophical worldview, water served as a foundational element for all physical forms, but he also acknowledged the presence of an incorporeal force in all things. This force, according to Aristotle, constituted a significant departure from a worldview in which anthropomorphic gods explained phenomena. Instead, Thales associated this force with constant motion or self-movement, akin to the principles underlying magnetism and atomic theory in contemporary times.
After Thales, the next major thinker to emerge in ancient Greece was Anaximander. He did away with water as the most fundamental element, believing the concept to be logically inconsistent, and said a boundless substance, which he called the Empyrean, was the most fundamental source out of which all things derived, and that everything that existed came from it and passed back into it.
This perspective bears similarities to concepts found in quantum theory, particularly the uncertainty principle, which suggests that the nature of things remains indeterminate until observed. In this sense, reality can be seen as a form of information that encompasses multiple possibilities until an observer becomes involved. What makes this view intriguing is that it potentially allows for different realities to coexist for the same observer at different points in time, thus circumventing the famous grandfather paradox often associated with time travel.
Another notable aspect of the grandfather paradox is its role in questioning the feasibility of time travel. It posits that if time travel were possible, a person could travel back in time and alter events in a way that prevents their own birth, leading to a paradox. This paradox is a recurring theme in science fiction, often with catastrophic consequences unless resolved by the protagonists. By considering reality as inherently indeterminate until observed, it becomes conceivable that a time traveler could experience distinct timelines or multiple worlds without affecting each other. In this framework, a time traveler would essentially become a different observer, and different versions of reality could be encountered without disrupting their original timeline.
While it remains unknown whether Anaximander himself held such advanced views, some regard him as one of the most significant thinkers prior to Isaac Newton. His ideas resonate with the modern notion that quantum reality is a limitless and indeterminate entity capable of encompassing multiple states until observed. This parallel between the relativity of time for different observers and the potential relativity of reality itself offers a novel perspective on time travel and resolving some of the potential paradoxes associated with it.
The concept of time travel, the idea of slipping through the past or peeking into the future, has captivated us for generations, not because it answers questions, but because it asks the most daring ones. It's through these imaginative stories that we can play with time, bend it, break it, and ultimately explore what it means to be human in a universe that never sits still.
Time travel stories do more than stretch the imagination. They challenge the very foundation of how we perceive reality. They force us to ask whether time truly flows in one direction, or if it's a more complex network, where the connections between past, present, and future might be intertwined in ways we can't yet comprehend. These narratives drive us to confront questions that push against the limits of physics and philosophy. Is time a river that flows in one direction, or could the future reach back to influence the past?
Though time travel often feels like pure fiction, it's a subject that has drawn serious attention from the scientific community. Einstein's theory of relativity introduces the possibility of time dilation, where time can bend, stretch, or compress under extreme conditions, such as near the speed of light or within intense gravitational fields. This concept has led physicists to speculate that, under the right circumstances, manipulating space-time might be more than just a fantasy.
Physicist Amos Ory takes this a step further with his theoretical time machine. Drawing on relativity, Ory proposes using gravitational forces to create a loop in space-time, effectively forming a tunnel that might allow for backward travel through time. His idea centers around a donut-shaped structure capable of generating a gravitational field strong enough to warp space-time. Using exotic matter, or potentially a configuration of spinning disks, this device could theoretically send one of two clocks back in time, while the other remains in the present. However, this journey is bounded. You could only travel back to the point when the machine was first activated, meaning time travel would be limited to the machine's own lifespan.
Ory's proposal isn't without its challenges. It assumes we could generate the necessary gravitational forces without collapsing into a black hole, and it raises questions about whether such a time tunnel could exist at all. Unlike other theories that involve traversing faster than light or using hypothetical wormholes, Ory's approach offers a different way of thinking about how time might be manipulated.
However, the concept of time travel remains theoretical, and even if it were possible, beyond our current technology. But anomalies continue to fuel curiosity in the popular imagination about time travelers. Examples include the time-traveling hipster in a 1941 photo, a woman in a 1928 Charlie Chaplin film seemingly using a mobile phone. Another case involves a 1995 Mike Tyson fight, where a spectator appears to hold a smartphone. Rather than indicating the presence of time travelers, these examples are likely cases of mistaken identity involving common technology, such as hearing aids or early portable cameras.
More importantly, even if a time machine like Ory's were possible, it would only allow travel back to the point when the machine was first built, meaning we could not journey further into the past before its construction. This limitation would leave much of our history beyond reach, with no way to uncover more about figures like Anaximander, about whom we know very little. Historical records indicate that Anaximander was the first philosopher to document his studies, yet only a single fragment of his work has survived. Fragmentary accounts discovered after his death provide some insight into his ideas, however.
Aristotle and Theophrastus highlighted his revolutionary notion of the apeiron, the infinite or boundless, as the primal substance from which all things emerge and return. Anaximander's cosmological theories included the concept of the Earth as a free-floating cylinder suspended in space, surrounded by celestial rings of fire that explained the sun, moon, and stars. These ideas were referenced by later authors such as Plutarch and Hippolytus, and, while disproven, demonstrate his innovative attempt to explain the natural world through observation and reasoning. Simplicius, a 6th century commentator, preserved the only surviving fragment of Anaximander's writing, which has inspired the titles of works such as Carlo Rovelli's The Order of Time. Rovelli views Anaximander as a foundational figure in the history of science. In the fragment, Anaximander writes, "Things perish into that out of which they are born, as it is ordained, for they pay penalty and retribution to each other for their injustice according to the order of time." This profound statement reflects a vision of cosmic justice, equilibrium, and the cyclical nature of existence.
Anaximander's view of time was thought to be cyclical and shares notable parallels with Babylonian cosmology. The Babylonians conceptualized time as a recurring cycle governed by celestial patterns such as the movements of the moon, sun, and planets. This cyclical framework was central to their calendar systems and rituals, emphasizing the renewal of cosmic order.
Lastly, Diogenes Laertius credited Anaximander with the invention of a key tool for measuring time and celestial movements. The gnomon depicted here is a fascinating timekeeping device. It functions as a type of sundial, harnessing the sun's position to determine the time of day. This ancient timepiece was introduced to Greece by Anaximander, who imported it from the Babylonians. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and ancient Egyptians had distinct methods of measuring time that differed from our contemporary approach. While the Sumerians devised the concept of dividing and measuring in units of 60, they did not have a precise equivalent to our modern concept of seconds. Instead, they primarily measured time in hours. The term second, derived from the Latin word secundus, is a relatively recent addition to our timekeeping vocabulary. Its literal meaning is following or next. The modern notion of measuring time in seconds and minutes emerged with the invention of clocks, which occurred in the 14th century. Prior to this development, ancient civilizations relied on various timekeeping devices, such as sundials, sand dials, and water clocks.
After Anaximander, the next major pre-Socratic philosopher was Anaximenes, a 6th century BCE Greek philosopher and a disciple of Anaximander. Anaximenes proposed that the fundamental substance of the universe was air, which he believed was infinite, and that all matter emerged from its processes of condensation and rarefaction. Through these transformations, air could become everything from fire to solid earth.
Following him was the philosopher Pythagoras, who, although leaving no writings of his own, profoundly influenced his students, shaping the trajectory of Greek thought for generations to come. Pythagoras was not only a mathematician, but also a mystic and philosopher. At his school in Croton, his followers practiced disciplines such as silence, meditation, and various mystical rituals. One notable practice involved entering caves and inhaling noxious fumes, which induced hallucinations. In their altered states, they would draw geometric shapes on the cave walls and later return, when sober, to interpret these symbols.
Pythagoras was also said to have conversed with Abaris the Hyperborean, a legendary figure who, according to myth, flew across the world on an arrow gifted by the god Apollo, a gift he later bestowed upon Pythagoras. While modern scholarship views Abaris as a mythological figure, He is mentioned as a real historical person in some ancient writings, including Plato's works.
The idea of flying across the world bears intriguing similarities to claims made by Viktor Grebennikov, a Russian entomologist in the 1990s, who asserted that he had built an anti-gravity platform from the chitin of a Siberian insect, which he then placed within a wooden case. Grebennikov reported that this device allowed him to hover and fly at great speeds, rendered him invisible to observers, creating crop circles when landing, and even caused disruptions in the normal flow of time.
Grebennikov also claimed to have witnessed a strange phenomenon where an insect placed in a test tube reverted to its larval stage, hinting at a possible reversal of the arrow of time. Supporters of Grebennikov maintain that he was a respected scientist and argue that his findings were suppressed by the Soviet government, which heavily censored his writings. They claim his invention was dismissed without proper scientific scrutiny. Critics, however, argue that if such a device truly existed, it would have been adopted or weaponized by various governments. Moreover, beyond a few photos purportedly showing his machine in flight, no concrete evidence supports his claims. As with the story of Abaris the Hyperborean, many believe Grebennikov's account is best viewed as a modern myth rather than scientific fact.
Pythagoras was thought to have believed that reality could be understood through mathematical principles, arguing that numbers are the essence of all things. His teachings established foundational concepts in geometry and the harmony of the spheres, a belief that celestial bodies move according to mathematical equations, creating a cosmic harmony. Isaac Newton is said to have thought of Pythagoras as one of the most important thinkers of all time, and credited him as the founder of the theory of gravitation.
Newton's perspective may have been influenced by the Platonic solid, known as the dodecahedron. While we often view the ancient conceptions of the four classical elements, fire, earth, water, and air, as primitive, they were actually understood as geometric forms that constituted the fabric of reality. In his philosophy, Plato associated each of these elements with a specific regular solid. Earth was linked to the cube, air to the octahedron, water to the icosahedron, and fire to the tetrahedron. The fifth Platonic solid, the dodecahedron, was described by Plato in a rather enigmatic manner, as he noted that the god used it for arranging the constellations on the whole heaven. Pythagoras' ideas laid the groundwork for many later philosophers, and his influence reached far beyond a fifth element. In the Republic, Plato presents the allegory of the cave, where a man, imprisoned in darkness, perceives only shadows on a wall, illusions mistaken for reality. When he escapes the cave, he discovers the true essence of existence, encountering the timeless forms that represent ultimate reality beyond mere appearances.
These forms resonate with Pythagorean thought, as they suggest that the underlying structure of reality is both mathematical and abstract. Just as Pythagoras emphasized the importance of numbers in understanding the universe, Plato's forms embody the idea that true knowledge arises from grasping these eternal, unchanging truths.
Plato himself stated that time was a moving image of eternity, an image made eternal but moving according to number, while eternity itself rests in unity. And it is this image that we call time.
This is a view he might have perhaps been indebted to the Pythagoreans for, as they believed the cosmos was governed by numerical harmony.
In contrast, Aristotle's notion of time involved the concept of change and motion, closely tied to his focus on the physical world. Aristotle argued that time is the measure of change in relation to before and after, an idea that may have harkened back to the pre-Socratic views of Heraclitus, who is often called the obscure philosopher, and who viewed reality as being in constant flux, and is famously associated with the element of fire, which he considered the fundamental force behind all change.
Heraclitus's philosophy emphasized the unity of opposites and the perpetual change of all things, famously stating, "No man ever steps in the same river twice," a metaphor symbolizing the constant flow of existence. He was intimately connected with the Delphic maxim, "Know thyself," reflecting his conviction that reality's hidden nature required deep self-reflection to truly comprehend. His cryptic statements and enigmatic personality contributed to his reputation as a philosopher whose ideas were as elusive as they were profound, much like the oracles at Delphi. Socrates reportedly remarked,
"The part I understand is excellent, and so too, I dare say, is the part I do not understand. But it requires a diver to reach its depths."
This mirrors the reputation of the 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger. Just as Heraclitus's fragmentary and paradoxical sayings left many of his contemporaries either perplexed or in awe of their depth, Heidegger's dense and complex writing has garnered both admiration and criticism. Critics accuse Heidegger of deliberately obscuring his ideas within a labyrinth of invented terminology and convoluted syntax, while others consider his work profoundly insightful, offering radical and transformative ways of thinking about existence.
Heidegger's supporters argue that his obscure language is necessary because he is attempting to articulate ideas and modes of thought that extend beyond the limits of conventional language and logic. Heidegger believed that the question of being had been forgotten or misrepresented throughout the history of philosophy, and to address it anew required a revolutionary vocabulary that broke with traditional metaphysical categories.
Modern philosophy's approach to ontology, or the study of being, is often framed with questions like, why does anything exist?
In his work Being and Time, Heidegger presents a unique perspective on time, linking it directly to human existence and mortality. He argues that time only gains meaning because of death. We live with the awareness that our lives are finite, and this awareness shapes how we experience time. Heidegger uses the term Dasein to describe human beings as beings in the world, whose very existence is bound up with time.
For Heidegger, the human experience of being is always connected to the past, present, and future. We are thrown into the world, meaning we find ourselves in specific circumstances shaped by past events, yet we constantly look ahead to future possibilities. This is what Heidegger calls being toward death, an understanding that our lives stretch between birth and death, and that this awareness of our finite future deeply influences how we live in the present.
Moreover, Heidegger believes that we cannot separate our experience of time from the historical context we are born into. Our individual experiences are shaped by the world's history and traditions, and we constantly interact with these through our actions and choices. In this sense, time is not just a sequence of moments, but a deeply personal and historical process where our past, present, and future are intertwined. This understanding of time, according to Heidegger, is key to understanding what it means to be human.
Heidegger also introduces the concept of the they, which plays a crucial role in shaping how we understand ourselves and live in the world. The they represents the anonymous collective force of society that influences our everyday thoughts, actions, and decisions. It refers to the way we often conform to social norms, expectations, and behaviors without questioning them, doing things simply because that's how one does them.
Heidegger argues that much of our daily life is spent in this inauthentic mode of being, where we lose sight of our individuality and instead follow the crowd. Under the influence of the they, we become absorbed in conventional ways of thinking, adopting roles and identities that have been predefined by society. For example, we might pursue certain careers, hold specific opinions, or act in particular ways simply because they are socially expected, not because we have critically reflected on them ourselves.
The they also affects how we experience time. When we live according to the they, time is often viewed as something measured in units, minutes, hours, days, where we move through life following schedules and routines dictated by societal expectations. In this mode, Heidegger argues, we fail to live authentically because we ignore the deeper reality of our own future death.
To live authentically, Heidegger argues that we must break free from the they and confront the reality of our own mortality. We need to acknowledge that we are not just anonymous numbers in a crowd, but individuals with limited time. This awareness allows us to make choices that are true to our own being rather than merely following what they expect of us. It's a call to own our lives, live deliberately, and recognize that we alone are responsible for shaping our existence within the framework of time and death.
Heraclitus, in turn, was known for views that broke away from the conventional beliefs of his time. Unlike Heidegger, who saw death somewhat differently, Heraclitus, much like the ancient Egyptians, regarded it as a metamorphosis. Modern science, by contrast, holds that with the death of the body, and subsequently of the brain and sensory perception, our existence ends. Death is likely akin to the time before we were born, a state of nothingness where experience and thought are impossible due to the absence of a physical body to perceive or think. Heraclitus held a different perspective and also suggested that the Greek immortals did not interact with humans because they regarded humanity much as we view primates or young children.
In Heraclitus's vision of the afterlife, a person did not appear to linger as an ethereal essence or ghostly shade, but instead continued with a renewed, tangible body. He is attributed with the striking phrase, "Souls smell in Hades," suggesting that he might have believed in an existence in the afterlife that has physical, even sensory qualities. He further wrote, "There await men after they are dead things which they do not expect or imagine, foretelling like an oracle that beyond death lies something we are not yet aware of."
Heraclitus's views might seem to be in opposition to Heidegger's being toward death. Some might even argue that beliefs in an afterlife are generated out of a fear of the unknown, which lead people to invent fairy tales of an afterlife. Rather than confronting the cold reality of death, they imagine that life goes on much as it does now, despite the lack of a brain and body. However, one could also argue that the purpose of both Heidegger and Heraclitus was not so much to state a theory, but to inspire the reader to question, think for themselves, and arrive at knowledge through a preconceptual framework, an intuitive and lived sense of the world that exists, rather than the dead, predictable world of the they.
For instance, while the ideas of theological thinkers who influenced Heidegger, such as Søren Kierkegaard, may appear ridiculous to many in the scientific community, others argue that perhaps this intuitive approach might warrant less skepticism of an afterlife in the future. If a paradigm shift occurs that radically alters how we perceive the world, such a shift might involve other aspects of reality that science has not yet discovered. In his paper, Time Without End, physicist Freeman Dyson presented a famous thought experiment exploring the future of advanced civilizations. He posits that as technology progresses, a civilization might develop the ability to transfer consciousness to alternative mediums, enabling a person's consciousness to persist as information. Such a realm could bear a resemblance to the ancient concept of the underworld, from which there is no exit. If a civilization mastered such technology, ancient ideas about the afterlife could be seen as a reflection of future scientific possibilities rather than a mere poetic invention, one that might already have been engineered by another civilization in the past. Although such an idea would appear to lack any physical evidence, there is one way we could be completely oblivious to such a reality, and that is through an understanding of the relativity of time.
In 2024, researchers from Harvard University and Montana Technological University published a paper suggesting we should not blindly dismiss the possibility of a hidden, technologically advanced civilization existing on Earth, known as the crypto-terrestrial hypothesis.
The paper speculates that the sightings of unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs, often referred to as UFOs, might be the activities of intelligent beings that have concealed themselves on Earth, potentially residing deep underground, underwater, on the moon, or even walking among us in disguise. The researchers outlined several theories, including the idea that these crypto-terrestrials could be remnants of an ancient advanced civilization, a species that evolved independently on Earth, time travelers, and so on. While the authors admit these ideas are highly speculative and likely false, they argue that the hypothesis deserves genuine consideration due to the ongoing mystery surrounding UAP sightings.
To explore the phenomenon from a scientific perspective, one intriguing approach would be to consider the experience of time from the viewpoint of something traveling close to the speed of light compared to our experience of time on Earth. A person traveling near the speed of light theoretically experiences time much slower. They might only experience a day of time while a year of time passes on Earth. If advanced technology could manipulate gravity to alter the flow of time, as suggested by Einstein's theory of general relativity, this would fundamentally change the way time is experienced for those wielding such a device.
In such a scenario, if a hypothetical craft or entity had the ability to create a gravitational field that drastically altered time relative to Earth, it could experience hours of experienced time while only seconds passed for us. To an observer on Earth, such a craft would seem to move at an incomprehensible speed, potentially appearing as a flash of light, or more likely, it would be invisible. Conversely, to the entity using this time-dilating technology, the world around them would seem frozen or moving in extreme slow motion. This perspective could explain the elusive and rapid nature often reported in UFO and cryptid sightings, where these objects move in ways that seem to defy the laws of physics and which appear and disappear instantaneously.
To investigate the possibility time dilation is involved, we would need to clandestinely employ high-speed cameras capable of recording at exceptionally high frame rates, capturing moments that occur faster than the human eye or conventional technology can perceive. This approach could allow us to detect movements or phenomena that operate on a different timescale, potentially revealing technological objects or life forms that align with the idea of time dilation.
By analysing footage at these high frame rates, we could potentially uncover scientifically valid phenomena that remain invisible to our normal perception, phenomena that would undoubtedly evade researchers who fail to consider the effects of time dilation. This technique could not only reveal hour-long movements or events occurring in fractions of a second, but also challenge our assumptions about how reality unfolds at different scales of time. Such an approach might open the door to groundbreaking insights into how advanced technology could manipulate temporal reality, possibly offering empirical evidence that supports certain theories of time, quantum mechanics, or even the more speculative aspects of time travel.
This approach could even lend credibility to the idea that activities often considered paranormal, such as cattle mutilations, might be linked to theoretical technology capable of manipulating space-time, as frequently suggested by those exploring fringe theories. Between the 1960s and 1980s, thousands of cattle mutilations were reported across the United States, with many cases sharing eerily similar characteristics. Ranchers found cattle with organs removed with surgical precision, the animals drained of blood, and without any signs of struggle or footprints around the carcasses. Often, these mutilations involved incisions so clean that they seemed beyond the capabilities of conventional tools or predators, leading to speculation about some form of advanced technology being involved.
In response to the growing number of reports, the FBI launched an official investigation in 1979, particularly in states like Colorado and New Mexico, where the phenomenon was most prevalent. The investigation reviewed numerous cases, but ultimately concluded that many mutilations could be attributed to natural causes, such as scavengers or decomposition. However, this explanation failed to satisfy many witnesses who pointed to the consistent absence of blood at the scenes, the inexplicably precise nature of the cuts, and the FBI's apparent dismissal of these anomalies. If time-dilating technology were involved, it might explain how these actions could be carried out with such precision and invisibility, leaving behind traces that defy our conventional understanding of reality.
In Plato's Dialogues of Atlantis, he describes a ritual where Atlanteans sacrifice a bull and take the blood and throw it on a column of a material called orichalcum, which he adds, is a material that no longer exists in our time, but back then was considered more precious and valuable than gold, with an entire wall of the city of Atlantis consisting of orichalcum that was described as glowing with a red light.
Recent studies have revealed that proteins in bovine blood, such as bovine serum albumin, can stabilize gold nanoparticles, giving them remarkable optical properties, including the ability to absorb, redirect, or emit light. Interestingly, Some researchers exploring the unidentified aerial phenomena have speculated that certain substances in the blood of cattle could potentially act as a topological insulator when combined with an unidentified superconductive metamaterial. If this hypothesis holds true, then it could suggest a reason for why tens of thousands of cattle have met their end under very mysterious circumstances, and that Plato's ancient descriptions of a ritual involving the blood of a bull and a column of orichalcum might not be as mythical or primitive as often presumed.
One such place that involves vast reports of unexplained phenomena, such as flying saucers, cattle mutilations, and sightings of strange animals, is the Uinta Basin of Utah. At Skinwalker Ranch, a location known for its mysterious phenomena, television researchers have claimed to have discovered an underground donut-shaped anomaly, which intriguingly is the same shape as the time travel device proposed by physicist Amos Ory. They have documented activity that some suggest indicates time dilation technology, such as orbs appearing only in a single frame of camera footage. Additionally, they reported finding deep underground combinations of metals, not naturally occurring, potentially linked to advanced electronics and superconductors. There have even been alleged sightings and recovered remains of animals thought to be dire wolves, believed to be extinct for over 9,500 years.
Skeptics, however, argue that these claims lack empirical evidence and peer review, suggesting they are more likely exaggerated for entertainment value rather than grounded in scientific research. They point out that many of these narratives are sensationalized, designed to attract viewers and generate revenue rather than reveal any genuine scientific truth.
Proponents of the fringe perspective counter that the wealth of video, photographic evidence, and credible eyewitness testimony should not be dismissed so easily. They emphasize that many who investigate these phenomena have first-hand experiences, making them less inclined to accept skeptical rebuttals that they believe are often more implausible than the claims themselves. They might invoke the words of physicist J. Allen Hynek, who stated, "Ridicule is not a part of the scientific method, and the public should not be taught that it is."
Other notable pre-Socratic philosophers, such as Parmenides, Zeno, Empedocles, Democritus, and Anaxagoras, all grappled with the fundamental nature of reality. Parmenides, countering the views of Heraclitus, argued that change is an illusion, and reality is a single, unchanging whole. Protagoras, on the other hand, offered a different view, asserting that reality is subjective, shaped by individual human perception with his statement,
"Man is the measure of all things."
In some ways, these resemble the views of more modern philosophers such as Immanuel Kant. Kant argued that space and time are not external realities, existing independently of us, but are instead forms of intuition, structures that our minds impose on our experience of the world. According to Kant, we cannot access things in themselves, or the world as it truly is independent of our perception, because everything we perceive is filtered through these mental frameworks. Consequently, we can only know the world as it appears to us, not as it is in itself.
This brings us to the foundational figure of modern philosophy, Socrates. While the pre-Socratic philosophers sought to explain the nature of reality through abstract principles, Socrates focused on exposing the limits of human knowledge by questioning the hubris of those who believed they already knew everything, a lesson often overlooked by his students. His method of inquiry would resonate throughout millennia, influencing debates on knowledge, time, and human experience.
One such debate occurred between Henri Bergson and Albert Einstein in 1922. Bergson, a philosopher whose central idea revolved around durée, or duration, proposed a conception of time that differs from the measurable, quantitative time of physics. Bergson argued that real time, as experienced by consciousness, is qualitative, fluid, and continuous, impossible to break down into discrete units without distorting its essence. He believed that scientific time, treated as a spatialized, measurable concept, failed to account for the true nature of human experience.
Bergson's views on time laid the foundation for his later work on freedom and determinism, influencing fields such as psychology, existentialism, and even modern philosophy of mind. He argued that free will is possible because our actions unfold in a dynamic, lived experience of time, rather than being confined to a rigid, deterministic sequence of events imposed by scientific models. In this framework, human consciousness and decision-making are not bound by the mechanical progression of clock time, but instead emerge from the fluid, ever-changing nature of lived experience.
This distinction between scientific time and lived time became central to later existentialist thinkers such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. Sartre, in Being and Nothingness, argued that human beings are condemned to be free, highlighting how our consciousness continuously shapes the world through choices made in real, lived time. He emphasized that this freedom is not bound by the deterministic framework of scientific time, but is instead experienced as a fluid, ongoing process where each moment is an opportunity to define ourselves.
Sartre argued that human consciousness carries a sense of nothingness, which is an awareness of the absence of fixed, predetermined meanings or values.
Albert Camus also addressed the tension between scientific, measurable time and the personal, subjective experience of existence. For Camus, the relentless passing of objective time and the search for meaning within it highlights the absurdity of life. Camus emphasized that it is in our lived experience of time, in the moments where we confront this absurdity, that we have the freedom to create meaning, even if the universe itself remains indifferent.
The reality of time is a concept that is as elusive as it is indifferent to our attempts to understand it. Augustine of Hippo famously stated,
"What then is time? If one asks me, I know what it is. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know."
This thought captures the difficulty many have in defining time, a challenge that has echoed throughout the ages.
Whether viewed through the lens of science, philosophy, mythology, or the imaginative worlds of science fiction and fringe theories, humanity has continually sought to describe the mysteries of time. We've seen how gravity and velocity can alter the flow of time, thanks to the revelations of Einstein's theory of relativity. Simultaneously, we've explored how our subjective consciousness shapes our experience of time, as seen in the work of philosophers like Bergson.
This journey reveals that time is far more than a mere ticking of a clock. Clocks that might run differently for various observers. It's an intricate, mysterious, multifaceted dimension that appears intuitive until we truly contemplate it.
The nature of time is a mystery that challenges our very perception of reality, reminding us that what we think we know often dissolves the moment we try to fully understand it. Reflecting on the order of time as each moment unfolds to the next serves as an ever-present reminder of our own mortality, that time is an unyielding force that underscores the fleeting nature of existence itself. It marks the passing of daily life, the rise and fall of lives, of empires, and the impermanence of all things. In its relentless flow, we find not only the birth of tragedy, but beauty, and the realization that every moment is precious precisely because it can never be reclaimed.